Hi there everybody, and thanks so much for hitting the play button on this week's Art of Procurement. It's episode 282 with me, Philip Ideson. And in this week's podcast, I'm joined by Bill Michels. Bill is Vice President of Operations for the Americas at CIPS. Bill is also a really good friend of the pod. It's been a delight for me to welcome him back onto the show. And so in today's pod, we broadly discuss the global nature of today's supply chains. But specifically, I invited Bill really back on to follow up on the show that we recorded last summer, where we talked about the impact of trade tariffs and the impact that procurement leaders can do to mitigate their impact. So we follow up on that discussion, looking back over the past 12 months or so. And then I go further to ask Bill for some tips on how to proactively prepare for a recession. When a recession is going to come, we don't know. We're starting to think and talk about that a little bit more on the Art of Procurement. So it's just a good kind of some tips to get ahead of it so that when a recession does come, we're not taken by surprise. And so as I go into the pod, my first question for Bill actually was related to his role at CIPS. So the last time we talked on the show, I mentioned before it was 12 to 18 months ago last summer. He'd just taken the role of Vice President of Operations Americas there. And so I asked him, over that past 12, 18 months, how things have been going. How has CIPS really resonated and what are some of the things they've been working on?
There's a surprising welcome in the Americas on several fronts. First, from the businesses looking for support to enhance their teams. We have some very large clients in Silicon Valley, in a global automotive company. We've got construction clients. We've got utility clients, and public procurement, and even in the steel industry. So we're starting to see a lot of companies come to us looking for building skills and developing their teams. Mm-hmm. On the other side, we've got people coming looking for membership. They want to start a branch network in their area. They really want to communicate and network with other people in the Americas region. And then thirdly, I'm working on a program to help people get their certification. So really kind of bridge up from whatever certification they have to MCIPS, which is a degree level certification.
Yeah. What is it about CIPS do you think that is appealing to the Americas market?
What we're seeing, I think, is the global nature of CIPS. The fact that we're in the Middle East, we're in Australia, we're in Asia, we're in Europe, across Europe, and companies that have people in those regions and have seen the rigorous standards want to have the same thing here. And then when we go to people that aren't familiar with CIPS, they like the global nature of the business. They like the global nature of what we're doing, and the ability of us to be able to create programs. So we've created in Silicon Valley a digital learning network, which includes podcasts, animation, e-learning, research that they can get research on the topic. So they get learning when they want, where they want, and however they want to take it. So building a program like that, building that flexibility into programs has been very valuable.
Do you find that the demand for the types of training, like the skills that are being trained, is changing?
Oh, definitely so. I mean, I think there are some things where, classroom learning and really practicing are important, like negotiation. But I think in some of the other things, it's bits of learning. How do you learn? The podcast, a couple of podcasts on this topic, or people just don't have the time to sit in a classroom for a long time, unless it's a practical application. Or we're seeing a lot of boot camps too. Yeah. Come in, help us take people from very tactical to very strategic in a short period of time, in a week's time. We see that as a demand where people that have a lot of new people coming in really want to get them up to speed very quickly. And we also see that people really want a couple of other skills involved, like soft skills. Mm-hmm. So two of the most important skills are influencing and really using emotional intelligence.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about using podcasts. Just as an aside, I found out only yesterday that a really highly respected supply chain program is actually using Art of Procurement podcasts as part of their program, because it's just a new way for folks to really consume content that is accessible, as opposed to it being, always just being the same style. So I hear just more and more that folks are interested in new ways of getting information, and it's not just all about sitting in a classroom anymore.
Yeah, I think we're in a digital world. And I think when you look at people, speed to market is driving a lot of companies, and they just have huge amounts of stakeholders that have huge amounts of demands, and I think business is changing. So people have to learn on the fly, however they can learn. Mm-hmm. And I think when we look at 4 different generations in the workforce, we have to accommodate everybody.
Now, you obviously get to speak to a lot of CPOs, I'm sure, every single day. Based on your conversations within the industry, what would you say the general mood of the CPO is as we kind of head towards, we're right now in the fourth quarter, 2019, heading towards 2020?
Well, Phil, I think the CPO's focus is changing radically. I think when you start to think about the CPO of the past, a lot of energy was put on price and cost and try and drive costs out. But as we start to look at the future, we're starting to see more integrated value chains. And I think that the CPO is now starting to focus on value. So a great example is I work in construction, and you would think they want to get a lower cost of materials, mm-hmm. but they don't. They want to get a crew that can go through and finish their project and show up every day so that they get a return on investment for the land. So while they like to get the cost down as low as they can, they're more concerned about getting returns on investment for the land. And when you start to think about what's happening with products, I mean, products are speed to market. You and I a little earlier talked about getting an iPhone 11. They're already working on a 12. Yeah. And, speed to market is driving everything. So CEOs want revenue. They want innovation from the supply chain. They really want that. Then when you combine that with the political instability that we're seeing, trade mm-hmm. policies, changes, economic woes on the horizon, I think that the CPO is really worried about getting their team managing across the stakeholder community. Some of the places that I work with in Silicon Valley enables everybody to buy whatever they need. Yeah. So managing complex systems for sourcing pay and getting that done and making sure the contracts are in place and overseeing a huge community of purchases, it's changing radically for the CPO.
Now, do you find that's driven by the CPO, or that's driven by a CEO or CFO who are essentially challenging procurement to think differently?
I think it's coming from the CEOs and the business requirements. Mm-hmm. So if you empower everybody to purchase whatever they need, then you need to put in all those supporting infrastructure to be able to support that. So I think that's really critical for CPOs, and especially when they start to think about, where do I move trade? Should I be moving what I have? Should I be staying there? Should I be reshoring? Should I be applying for concessions from the government? So I think all of those things are on the mind of the CPO at the moment. So it's quite complex, quite dynamic. And I think, it's ever changing.
Yeah, it's challenging for a CPO who has perhaps always positioned their value proposition around savings to now go back. And I'm not saying savings aren't important, because people are always going to ask for savings. I'm not. In fact, that's a wrong statement. They're not always going to ask for it. But in most cases, companies are going to ask for savings in some way, shape, or form. To go back and say, hey, I was measured on savings all this time. Now I want to be measured in a different way that aligns better with the business. And it's hard to do that, I think, as a CPO, because perhaps you're acknowledging the fact that you weren't aligned with the business before.
That's right. And I think that, even looking for changing the value proposition. I was working in the glass industry, and they've got refractory bricks. And the question you have to ask people that are buying them is, because it costs like $25 million for a furnace to be down mm-hmm. for the time to rebuild it. So do you want a brick that lasts a year longer, or do you want to pay 3 or 4 cents less per brick? I mean, what's the value proposition for the business? Right. One delays a $25 million downtime. So it's just really interesting to think about how to change to a value proposition. And some businesses aren't there.
Right.
Some businesses are just not there. They haven't really made that transition yet. And if you look at the medium tier and lower tier companies, they're following the change, but they're not there yet.
Yeah, and I certainly see that on a day-to-day business. We sometimes assume that maturity is perhaps further along than it is, but there's still a lot of organizations who are still struggling to sell their executives on the role that procurement can play. And, until you really do that, it's hard to expect anything from an executive to look at procurement in a different way and to have different expectations from procurement. So I think it starts with us in that education piece of what is truly possible for a procurement group.
It was really interesting because I sat with a CEO the other day who wanted to his CPO was a temporary CPO who he's gotten for the first time, and he's leaving. Mm-hmm. And so the CEO had lunch with me, and he says, "Where do I find someone else? What do I look for?" And, I really boiled it down to a good procurement person has two qualities. One is they're curious. They want to know, how's this made? Yeah. Why do we get it here? Why is the supplier doing that? What's the price? What's the cost? So curiosity is the number one. And the number two thing is emotional intelligence. Can I build relationships inside and outside the business? And do I have that capability? And then third, the business acumen. We can teach 4-box matrices, and we can teach how to negotiate. We can teach how to build supplier relationships, and we can teach the process. But we can't teach those soft qualities, and I think they're starting to become more and more important as we look at the dynamics of procurement.
Yeah. How can procurement leaders then kind of create the environment where people can practice those soft skills, if you will, or to help them with behavioral change? Because that's not necessarily something you learn in a classroom.
Yeah, I think if you don't have that, you fail, especially in the indirect side, where the budget holder owns the budget. If you don't have the ability to influence and be part of that, and get into the spend and be a trusted advisor, you're really not going to make it, and you're going to spin people over and over again until you get the people with the right emotional intelligence and the right curiosity and the ability to be able to build relationships, strong relationships. That's our business. That's what we do. And if you think about long term, as we start to select suppliers now, we're architecting the supply chain of the future. So that's the most important job we have, and we have to think about that, because over time it's going to be the value that's contributed across the chain, and suppliers will be paid by that value contribution.
Yeah, and when you bring that into the indirect space, it's architecting business process, isn't it, and outcomes. So sometimes we think it's just the domain of direct procurement and physical supply chains, but you can still apply that to virtual supply chains, people-driven supply chains and services.
That's right. Right. And there are more and more, as that people like Amazon enter the MRO space, and you really have to start thinking about how can we reduce the complexity, make it easy to get these things, and satisfy the customer demand.
Now, the last time we talked on the pod, we were actually talking all about trade tariffs, and I think that was when they were just kicking off. Here we are, 12 months plus later, and trade tariffs are still all the discussion. In fact, we're sitting here, in between the middle of a negotiation with China that, will it be successful? Will it not be? It depends, I guess, which TV channel you subscribe to. But, how have you found that CPOs have been responding to the threat of tariffs? And, can tariffs be an opportunity as well?
Sure. Well, the first thing that people are doing is anything that they can move easily, a plastic mold or dye or something like that. They can move it to Malaysia or Vietnam or an area which is not affected by tariffs. So anything that's easy to move, they're moving. And then I think there's dynamics around where should your footprint be? And some CPOs and businesses are thinking that we want that footprint in multiple places where our markets are. So we duplicate facilities. And then there's the reshoring piece. And when we reshore things, they're coming back, but when they come back, they're being automated. Robots don't get tired. Robots work 24 hours a day. And so people are making massive investments to automate, and that takes out the ability to chase low-cost labor across the world. So those things are happening. And then some people are applying for the reduction of tariffs directly. I just saw Apple got 10 opportunities to get rid of the tariff, and I was in a company recently where they did the same thing. So I think that's another opportunity that people may not be aware of. So move it where you can. Think about where it should be for the long term, and then reshore it or apply for some kind of concession on the tariff.
It's interesting that it's being a catalyst for investing in innovation and investing in the automation and, yes, bringing it back home, but not necessarily with the intended consequence of it, of bringing something back home to then employ, hundreds of people or tens of people or 5 people or whatever it is, but to then just look at taking out the human element altogether and go the line of automation.
And I think that's what we're starting to see. And I think that, as people start to look at those investment decisions, they make a lot of sense because, chasing low labor around the world works only until the labor gets a middle class, and then you have to find another one. Yeah. So you're running out of places to go for low cost labor.
Yeah. Do you think that once there's some agreement on tariffs and you get back to some kind of business as normal, that all the steps that have been taken over the last year or so will be reversed and it'll be back to normal, or are these more kind of structural in terms of re-looking at footprints and looking at risk mitigation and reshoring? All those things we're not just going to suddenly go back and move them all to their old location.
I can't see that. It will cost us more money, and once we find the solutions that get us out of that problem, I can't see us moving things back just for the sake of moving things back. Yeah. Now, some industries can't move. When you look at the electronics industry that's been there, they're the ones that are applying for different opportunities to reduce the tariffs or eliminate the tariffs. Well, and some industries are gone. So if you think about the tool makers that used to be here building dies and in these tool making shops, they're not here anymore. Yeah. So people that are looking to to do that, they've got to find another location where they can do that. But some industries are completely gone, and to do it, you have to rebuild the whole industry.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's jumping on the back of tariffs, but it's a question that is really the main topic I wanted to explore today, and that's around recessions. Now, some people think a recession is coming. Some people think a recession isn't coming. Again, we can all get different perspectives and different signals on whether we think that's happening or not. But the fact of the matter is that at some point in the future, we will once again be going into a recession. And it's been a while. It's been 10 years, at least here in the US, since we have really gone through that. So I wondered if you could just kind of share well, one, I'd love to know from your perspective, you're obviously consulting with a lot of folks who are working globally who would be deeply impacted by recession. What are some of the red flags that you look for that at least steers that say, you know what, I need to perhaps be changing my thinking?
Yeah, a couple of things you look for is what's happening to the inventories. Mm-hmm. What are sales doing? What are inventories doing? So if your sales are decreasing and your inventories are increasing, that's a sure sign that there's an issue. If you look at the PMI, there's the market PMI and the ISM PMI, you can see that the trend is a downward trend. Mm-hmm. Consumer spending, consumer confidence is down, and I think that the benefit of the tax cut has about reached its end. Right. And you start looking at these symbols, you start to see. These indicators, you start to see things are definitely slowing down. And last week at the New England Supply Chain Conference, or NESCON, they had a great economist, Jack Carr, who looked at the inverted treasuries and some other things, and his prediction was that you'll see something about mid 2020. Right. It won't be early in 2020, but it'll go over because things are still moving along at a pace, but you're starting to see indicators and inventories and changes that are actually showing the slowdown.
Yeah, some of the listeners may laugh at one of my metrics of financial health, but we're very fortunate that we live very close to places like in Los Angeles. When we lived there, we lived close to Disneyland here at Disney World, and I've always looked at attendance at theme parks and entertainment as a cue of the health and the confidence that people have to spend. And I can say, the last 6 months, numbers have been down significantly. You notice all these areas, these parks and things being significantly quieter. with a lot less travelers from overseas as well. There's typically a lot of travelers from South America and Europe in these locations. People are being more hesitant to spend.
Right.
So that to me, kind of gives some triggers. It's just one of the reasons why I was interested in this as a topic, that even if we know we're not there now, it just has this feeling that it's something that we need to start preparing for.
Absolutely, and if you're in a position in an organization, you need to start thinking about dropping your inventories, rationalizing on which suppliers are going to be able to take you through the recession in a good way. You look at the financials on your suppliers, and the one thing that concerns me and has for a while is the fact that we've got the term stretched out to in some cases 90 to 120 days, and what I really worry about is we start to see inflation, and then we start to see interest rate hikes to kind of slow down the inflation. People, when money's free, it's great. You can run with long payment terms. When money costs you money, you're going to crash the front end of some of the supply chains. And there's no way, in my opinion, to be able to return money back to the terms that they were years ago. It's too much money in the supply chain now that's been used. So I think there's constant financial monitoring. You got to make sure you've got your programs and your systems set up to be able to understand what's happening with your supply base. And you really have to make sure you have alternatives as you start to look at where you're going to go. And I think you have to really, if you have 5 suppliers and eventually you're only going to need 3, having 5 isn't going to help you. It's going to be consolidating to the 3 support you. So I think lots of things need to be actually planned in order to be able to survive a recession.
Hi there, I want to thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. You can check out all of our back catalogue at artofprocurement.com/podcast, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter to make sure that you never miss an episode. And if you found value in today's show, I'd love if you would tell a peer, or perhaps go and rate and review by going to artofprocurement.com/review. Word of mouth really is the best way to help the podcast grow, and if you're able to do either one of those things, I would truly appreciate it.